and they do yeoman's work, and you'll find that out. And so we do a thought leader survey every year, and this was the #1 question that came out of our thought leader survey this last year is, you know, what is the effect of the down ag economy on rural Minnesota? So this is the #1 thing that thought leaders like yourself came back with. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Ash, and we're going to get started.
Welcome to the committee, and just introduce yourself and then be able to go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Chair Coffey, members of the committee. My name is Kelly Ash, Center for Rural Policy and Development. All three of us live and work out of rural Minnesota. I live in New London, Minnesota, in Candiota County. Julie works out of, well, I say Waldorf, but Waseca probably is more where most people would know where she lives. And then Marnie's out of Mankato. And so when we're talking about the topic of downturn in the rural, in agriculture and its impact on the rural economy, this kind of strikes home with us because we're kind of seeing some of these impacts and some of the impacts that aren't happening. And there's a lot of conversations around this. So the research question, and I apologize, I'm not sure. Let me check the display settings here real quick, see if I can get, no. Well, I don't know why it's getting cut off, but our research question was, what are the implications of the downturn in the agriculture economy on rural communities and their economy? So let me go through some of the goals we had with this. So the first part was examine the data and dispel some myths. I'm sure some of you have been hearing a lot about farmers not doing well, the agriculture economy not doing well, thus the rural economy must be doing bad. I think the most recent example was Beth Ford, CEO of Land O'Lakes, had a letter to the editor, or op-ed in the Star Tribune talking about how bad agriculture is doing right now and the impacts that it's having on our rural communities, and really making that direct link. But none of this is ever backed up with any sort of data, and so we wanted to try and see if we can sort through the data and kind of see what these impacts are, and specifically get at the location. And that was kind of our second goal. So how does the agriculture economy affect Minnesota's overall rural economy? And I think more importantly, where? Exactly where? We all have our definitions of what rural is, but there actually isn't a good definition of rural. And so we're hoping to kind of get specific and figure out where are the areas where we're seeing the most impacts. And then the third part is what policy might be needed and would be helpful for Minnesota's farmers in relation to the rural economy. In this part, we're actually not going to be talking about today because we are actually in the midst of this research. So this is all just kind of first go. This is what we're seeing in the data because we just started this project a few months ago. So I apologize. It's probably what you're most interested in, but we won't be able to talk about it much today. What we looked at, so we looked at 3 things, and it's important to know when we talk about agriculture, it's broad, right? And particularly when we're looking at data, there's a couple different things we're looking at. One is the farm economy. So this is farmers and the people working and producing livestock and selling livestock and producing crops and selling the crops and things like that on the farm. So this is sole proprietors, this is folks working on the farm and things like that. Then there's the ag-related industries economies, food manufacturing, merchant wholesalers, things like that. Those are kind of wage employees. That's a whole separate economy that we have to analyze in the data. And then we compare this to the overall rural economy. Again, rural economy does not equal agriculture. It's pretty diversified, and so we make some comparisons across the board. We do that by comparing revenues and earnings on the farms, along with the wages of the people working and employment. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, and comparing that with what changes are happening in the rural employment and wages, and what's happening in these industries involved in agriculture, and compare the two to see what's happening. So let's get started. So in order to do this research, we actually kind of have to figure out where farmers are at, because we can't figure out what the impacts are going to be if we don't know how farmers are doing today and how those impacts trickle down into the economy. So let's just look at farms real quick. So we have the farm economy peaks and valleys. That's too bad it's cut off. So this is farm cash receipts from marketing and production expenses. The blue line is farm cash receipts. That's just general revenue from selling crops, livestock production, things like that, and then the expenses associated with that. And you'll see, well, you can't see, but during the crop commodity boom, we saw this huge gap where revenues were really good, expenses were increasing, but there's a nice gap there, making some nice healthy net income, and now they've merged. So over the past few years, there's little net income being made. Expenses and revenues are pretty much the same. Actually, farm revenues from production has dropped 20% since kind of the crop commodity boom. So we want to look at solvency and liquidity on our farms. And this is the debt to asset ratio per farm in Minnesota. And so the debt to assets looks at all the debt, compares it to all the assets, and what's the percentage of that. And You can't see it, but by 2018, the Minnesota average debt to asset ratio was about 13%. So the amount of debt that farmers had was 13% of what their assets were. We actually took a look at during what we consider the farm crisis, because everybody keeps saying, like, well, are we approaching, you know, the 1980s farm crisis again? And that red line on top was the U.S. average for farms debt to asset ratio in the United States, and that was 19%. Again, we're at about 13% right now, so we're not real close. But there's a good argument to be made that debt to asset isn't always a great measurement, because a lot of folks are currently worried about liquidity. And that's where we're seeing a pretty big drop off. So this is the current ratio. So this is looking at assets, either cash or assets that can be converted to cash rather quickly, looking, and then what debt obligations need to be met in the next 12 months. That's the current ratio. And right now, you can't see it on here, but there's this humongous drop going down to 2018 where we're at about 1.7. What that means is for every $1.70 in assets that a farmer has, there's $1 liabilities. So we're getting pretty close. And bankers, this is what they look at when they're putting out loans this spring, is looking at this current ratio. And they like to see, if it gets close to 1.25, they get pretty nervous and they're not going to start lending. And we're getting closer to that. What this means is farmers are using up a lot of their assets to meet their current obligations and are burning through some of their easily liquidated assets to meet their debt obligations. So that's what's happening on farms. So how does that translate into communities in rural areas? So the farm economy impact locations, we're looking at earnings. And so earnings is farmers' sole proprietorship. Yeah, take some, you can fix that, great.
And this is available on the website, so unfortunately.
Not yet, because we're in the middle of this research, but we could send you the
But
presentation.
on our website, I think your presentation is on
absolutely.
our website, so unfortunately, we don't have our computers with us, most of us today, so we
Yeah.
can't see it. So hopefully it's, we can repair it, but.
So we, so looking at farm earnings then. So farm earnings is essentially the net income. So the income farmers are making after production, along with some of the wages and compensation by hard laborers. And what you can see is on the left side is an index. And we, in your handout, you'll see we have like the rural urban commuting areas. So we have county group, the county group that's entirely rural, a county group that has a town rural mix, a county group that's urban, town, rural, and then a county group that's entirely urban. And you can kind of see how those categorizations work. And you can see there are actually counties outside of the 7-county metro that are entirely urban, Blue Earth County being one of them. And those, we like to use this designation because it gives a little bit more nuance, because there actually aren't a lot of counties that are entirely urban or entirely rural. Most counties are somewhere in between. And so these 5 lines represent Minnesota, and then those 4 RUCA categories. And yeah, you can see it a little bit there now. Perfect. Yep, thank you. Appreciate that. And you can see that red circle on the left side is growth in farm earnings indexed to the 2001 levels. And you'll see during the crop commodity boom that huge increase, right? Every single RUCA category had about 600 to 400% larger net income or farm earnings compared to they did in 2001. And you see afterwards that huge drop off where now farm earnings are at, it's pretty much where they were in 2001. So we want to compare what those are in terms of total earnings. If farm earnings make up a large percentage of total earnings for these areas, then we should see a similar spike. On this particular chart, we'll see that only entirely rural areas, the entirely rural county group is the only one with a spike. All the other types of counties have a diversified enough economy where farm earnings don't make up a significant percentage of the total earnings in those counties, and thus they're a little bit more straight, you don't see that spike. So again, we're kind of looking at entirely rural areas as being the ones most impacted by earnings. We can look at employment. So this is farm employment, so not ag industry employment. This is employment such as sole proprietors and folks working on the farm, hired laborers. And you can see there's been a decrease in farm employment since 2001. It's been dropping off pretty steadily. There wasn't a huge increase during the crop commodity boom either. This is due to a number of factors. Farms getting bigger, more automation, things like that. We compare the total employment index of 2001 for all of the areas. So the total employment on the right side of the chart there, you'll see that they've been increasing, and our entirely rural areas have been seeing decreases since 2001. There isn't a lot of evidence that farm employment makes up a big percentage of employment in our rural areas. However, This is pretty big groups, and so we dug in a little bit deeper to kind of see, okay, more specifically at some of our EDRs and at the county level, are we seeing some of those impacts? And that's where you do. This is 3 counties that we pointed out in that handout, that are 3 EDRs that we pointed out in our handout that kind of highlight where we think there are some issues related to earnings, where the farm earnings make up a significant portion of the total earnings in those counties. And those EDRs that we look at are 4, which is West Central, 6W, which is the upper Minnesota River Valley, so like Swift County, Lac Paro, Yellow Medicine, and then 8, which is Southwest. These aren't big shockers, right? We knew Southwest Minnesota would probably ski a list worse than anywhere else. Northwest wasn't as impacted as we thought it would be. We were kind of surprised by that. We thought there would be more significant declines. And again, you can see we actually compared these EDRs with EDR 9, a typical EDR where you'd think agriculture plays a pretty big role, and a lot of counties weren't showing a lot of impacts in EDR 9. You can see it here again, looking at farm earnings. You're seeing that spike on the left side, but on the right side, it's only those 3 EDRs that I pointed out that show a similar spike in decline, while EDR 9 kind of just continued its trajectory. Again, EDR 9 has Mankato in it, and so if any place has a larger urban area, there's enough diversification that you're not going to see the impacts as much. So, okay, that's talking about farm earnings. Now there's the whole ag industry side of things. And so we worked with the University of Minnesota, Department of Applied Economics, to try and come up with the categories in which farmers are likely going to have to spend less in order to compensate for the reduction in farm earnings. And so these are the 4 categories that we've been looking at: farm machinery purchases, building purchases, indoor improvements, cropland rental payments, and fertilizer purchases. They're kind of the 4 most givable as far as being able to reduce the spending. So we looked at the gross sales for these ag-related industries and compared it to total gross sales. And we can see that the green line there, ag-related businesses, you're seeing that kind of spike and then that decline of gross sales since 2003. And then all businesses, you'll see, saw the Great Recession hit, had a little reduction, but then just kind of kept on plugging along. So there are some impacts in ag-related industries. But when we look at the ag-related industries as a percentage of total employment across our planning regions, so each color represents a planning region, you'll notice Southwest Minnesota has the highest, with right around 11%. There's a couple things to take from this chart. One is Southwest obviously has a high percentage. But the second thing is there's no trends. There's no bump when crop commodity boom hit. There's no decline when the crop commodity prices have gone down. They've stayed relatively flat, which is kind of interesting. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about why that might be here in a few slides. So we took a look at wages to see, okay, maybe folks are taking pay cuts or what might be happening with wages. And again, we're not seeing anything big. There's a couple interesting elements in this chart. One is just seeing kind of gradual increase in wages, nothing too big. The second piece, that blue line, is actually the 7-county metro area. So for a lot of metropolitan areas, counties in the room, that may think agriculture doesn't touch you, some of the highest paid jobs are actually in the 7-county metro when it comes to ag-related industries, particularly around merchant wholesalers, which is kind of interesting. And you can see the average ag-related industry employment per, or wage per employment was right around $72,000 in the 7-county metro by 2018. The next closest was Southwest at $52,000. Pretty significant difference. It's kind of an interesting fact there. And again, this is looking at the 2018 ag-related industry wages per employment map-wide. And you can kind of see where the concentration of wages per employment is located in particularly Hennepin and Ramsey County, and then down in Blue Earth and below. And then in the Southwest section, you'll see more wages. That's just kind of an interesting tidbit. I think I'll leave it at that. I'll move ahead here. So why aren't we seeing bigger impacts? And there's a couple of things. One that needs to be mentioned is farmers are shouldering the downturn and taking on more debt. They have to continue to produce, they have to take on more debt, and they have to continue buying the seed, continue buying the fertilizer, and doing their thing. And so essentially, any ripple effects that are happening because of prices, they're taking on that burden, and it's not trickling down yet. How much longer that can go, I don't know. Also, farmers tend to invest when times are good, and so when the crop commodity boom kind of happened there, and were flush with revenue, that's likely when a lot of the purchases happened. And since then, they have been able to kind of stave off and do their thing without having to make any sort of major purchases or anything like that. And also, it needs to be mentioned, the rural economy is more diverse than people think. There isn't as direct of a link from agriculture to the rural economy as people want there to be. It's not that it isn't important, it is important, but when we're looking at rural community and economic development, there's a lot of other things that need to be taken into account when we're talking about those pieces. So further research we're going to be looking at, and we'd be happy to ask questions and also take some input of what you guys would like to see, because we're here for you. We're going to be looking at more nuanced impacts in our most rural counties, ER4, 6W, and 8. We didn't include retail sales in our analysis, and it would be interesting to see with less net income and less earnings from farms, are they spending less just on retail in general? How does that mean on a household side, or where are they cutting corners? The second piece is how much longer can farmers hold on? We're hearing rumors and murmurings that it's likely we're going to see more bankruptcies this spring, that loans from banks might get a little bit tighter, a little bit harder to come by. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the general impacts from that are. And then how might a drop in agricultural land values impact property tax dependent programs? Land values are staying stubbornly high. I didn't put a chart in here, but we have the chart that shows land values go almost 1-to-1 with the increases in the crop commodities. They both increase. And now as crop commodities have declined, the land values have stayed relatively stable, maybe a little bit of decline, but not nearly as much. As bankruptcies happen and as bigger farmers come in and buy up the land, or institutions come up and buy the land, there's a little bit of a nervousness about what kind of leverage these people will have in purchasing this land and drop prices and land values down, which might have some pretty significant ramifications on school referendums and other type property tax referendums for our rural areas. As most of you probably know, when schools are passing a referendum, agricultural land property taxes makes up a significant portion of referendums and bonding. And so that's going to be something that we're going to be keeping an eye on too. So just to end too, just talking about the rural economy, we did a whole research project last year talking about workforce shortages in rural areas. Everywhere outside of 7-county metro is either at the same level or not feeling more pressure to fill job vacancies than they are in the 7-county metro area. This is a significant issue. And when you talk to any of our rural community network developers, this is the #1 issue they're talking about. It's people recruitment and retention. And so I think, looking at the narrative of rural areas not doing well, farm economy is bad, thus, it's actually a little bit of a disservice for our rural areas where we're seeing a ton of opportunities as far as jobs and livability than ever before. So, and the largest barriers that we're seeing in rural areas is the lack of housing and childcare for people recruitment and retention. So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, we'd be happy to take questions and happy to take requests for any sort of data or slides that help pinpoint this a little bit more. And I apologize again about the wide presentation.
That's okay. Thank you. Ms. Tesh, you're right. Absolutely. There's a lot of information, and it was glad you rolled through it as quickly as you did. Unfortunately, we don't have all day to be able to get the seminar that you deserve to have. So I appreciate that you were able to do that. I'm wondering when you're going to be completing this kind of process, and
Yeah.
when you anticipate?
Chair Poppy, yeah, thanks. We plan on this next month. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we're in the process of running this data by a few more experts just to make sure we're talking about things right. And we want to get some more evidence on the ground. We like to do the data thing, but we want to try and find, go to Swift County and some of these other counties and get a little bit more kind of on the ground. How's it feeling? How's it shaking out? Things like that, because anecdotes are helpful when it comes to the data and putting the ground in.
Thank you. I think when we get to that point, maybe we'll have a kind of a set time that we could have you do a presentation, maybe not even within the committee, but set aside a room where you'd be able to give us some information. Maybe I think that would be helpful, because it's handouts. And have handouts, yes, that would be helpful too. Okay, so we've got 4 people on the list. I'm going to roll right through them. Representative Anderson.
Just very quickly, thanks, Madam Chair. A quick question on your statistics about comparing metro area aggravated jobs to the greater Minnesota area. Did your metro area jobs include, for example, the CEOs of CHS, Land O'Lakes, Cargill, to really skew that number?
Mr. Ash.
Yeah, Chair Poppy, Representative Anderson. Yeah, I think so. Absolutely it does. Yep, that's going to skew it. Also, these are the types of jobs where it might be graphic design, marketing, communications, things that are more kind of 9 to 5, I don't want to say college level type jobs, but more of that kind of administrative type management positions. That's probably where they're held.
Good point. Representative Cleburne.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and my question is related to that issue. I represent Plymouth, Minnesota. So I asked specifically to be on this committee because we have a lot of food and ag-related employment, and they are good paying jobs, and the face of agricultural jobs are changing, or is changing, the face is changing. So, when we are thinking about agriculture going forward, and we're looking at positions that can be done outside of the rural area, rural living area, but are still very much impacting that economy. I'm wondering, when you look at the total percentage of ag-related employment versus our state employment as a whole, what, do you know that percentage that truly is? I mean, I saw the data, I used my phone to read your slides, very helpful. Do you have the data as to the comparison for total ag and food related employment versus the state employment numbers?
Yeah. Yes, Chair Poppy, Representative, yes, I do have that data. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but usually when we compare, so if you're talking just ag industry, so not farm employment, not farmers, you're typically looking at statewide.
I'm actually talking about ag and food, so.
Yeah, so ag, like food manufacturing, yes. We're typically, I'd have to look back, but I wanna say it's 3 to 6%. It's not huge.
Of the total state employment?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair Poppy.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think you touched on the key catch-22, the overall challenge in agriculture, and that's the issue of land availability. And that because land values stay high, then emerging farmers can't get land. And did you look at the impacts of the MFIT payments in terms of keeping land values artificially high? And even our tax policies, where we're trying to help the farmers, but actually, because we may keep the land values high, we prevent emerging farmers. And I don't mean passing it on to the children. I mean new farmers coming in who've never farmed before and they can't get land because the land values are not going down. And I understand about having equity and people have their investments in their land, but until land values come down, we are not going to have land available. And there is land hoarding going on out there. There's people who have land and they can get the loans to buy more land. And so then they block out people at the auctions who may have the opportunity to own it. What is the solution to that land hoarding, land value stabilization that's going on?
Commissioner Ash, I'm not sure you can answer that in 30 seconds, but you can give an answer, and I know, when we get to the next part of our meeting, we are going to be talking about emerging farmers and what are some of the things going on with that. So we'll hit on that a little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah, Chair Poppy, Representative Hanson, thanks for the question. So I wrote it down. I haven't looked into that. All I know is anecdotally what people are kind of predicting of things to happen, and we're at a time where the most efficient and cost-effective farmers are the ones that are going to be able to buy up the land of anyone that might be bankrupt. And right now, that's where the market is at, and so I don't know what that kind of impact that's going to have on land values. And I wrote down the program, and let us look into it, because that's our next phase is on this research project is looking at land stuff. So I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Hanson, for the question. I have a similar thing on land values. You said historically they track what building prices or commodity prices. Apparently they're not. Why is that?
Okay.
Chair Poppy, Representative Hamilton, I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know yet. And I would like to correct that. Historically, just since 2001, they tracked along with that commodity boom. They tracked really, really nicely, and then they haven't since. So I don't know.
Good. It sounds like we'll be able to do this again maybe in a couple of months before the end of session. We'll be able to hear more, and certainly if people have questions or have ideas, they can reach out to you. Ms. Tesh, some closing
Chair Poppy and committee, thank you very much. I just want to mention that you're going to be seeing a lot of things coming out from the center here this session. So we have this research project going on. We will also be releasing a project on rural healthcare and hospital mergers here coming up in the coming months as well. And if you want to find us, we're on social media. We're starting a podcast next week. We're having videos, brand new website, the whole 9 yards, and you will all be getting our online newsletter as well. So make sure to read that. So we're here to serve you and to give you that information about rural Minnesota. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, thank you. Appreciate it, and stay safe driving home. Okay, so we're turning over now to